Collaboration is founded on clear communication and willingness to work towards a common purpose. And you might wonder, well, why do you even have to state this? It's because IEP meetings can be a cast of thousands, it feels like, and there can be competing ideas and methodologies and philosophies behind recommendations, and it's not unheard of for there to be some degrees of conflict at IEP meetings, which is why we want to start with a collaborative framework. Schools are required to offer parents the opportunity to be consulted. An IEP should never be written in a dark room by people on the inside and then given to the parent and said, here's the IEP, sign it. That is not a collaborative IEP process, right? So that's problematic. We don't want to see that. And the IEP can include consultation with other people outside of the parents, expert consultation, which is the process of seeking input from other people. That could be a behavior analyst, speech pathologist, other professional. And I'll talk a bit more about that because there's actually been some legal action around that in British Columbia that has led to some conclusions there. But when there is consultation, it certainly does require professional humility, recognizing that I'm not going in there to serve my agenda or to be the person who is right or the person who is listened to, but we are there to serve the needs of the student for whom we are writing the IEP. So collaboration, of course, is best achieved when people are respectful of one another, when they are in a trusting and honest and open atmosphere that is kind of free of conflict and people kind of arguing for their positions, right? Just recognizing I'm okay to kind of sit back and contribute, and I understand the case manager will take everybody's input and then decide on what will go into that document. So who should be at the IEP? I've said cast of thousands. It can certainly feel that way. Parents should be there first and foremost. The big comfy chair is reserved for mom and or dad or whoever the parents may be. I alluded earlier before the break about the student when I was talking about the I statements and the competency-based IEPs. And so absolutely, the student should be there if the student can contribute in any way. And this is along a continuum. The student may come in just for a brief part of the IEP, or where you get their input on one of the long-term goal areas or particular objectives, and then you excuse the student from the rest of the IEP meeting. Or you may have it entirely devoted to the student. There's some terminology around student-directed IEPs, and you can think about this for the students who have the skill repertoires and most sophistication to truly be their own best self-advocates, so that they come in and instead of this cast of people making decisions about them without them, we're making decisions, we're allowing you to make the decisions and we're here to support you. And then they're truly genuine I statements. So don't discount the role of the student. Again, I don't want to be too redundant, but I was kind of raised, so to speak, in the practice and mentality of, well, we meet, we don't include the student. But as more and more time passes, I'm encountering more and more circumstances where I'm thinking the student should be here, right? We should be thinking about that more actively. Next, in terms of the school staff, you would have the case manager, and that person goes by a wide range of different titles across different school districts in British Columbia and further abroad. IST, LST, LAT, it could be the counselor, resource teacher, special education teacher, whatever the title. The case manager is the host and the author of the IEP. The teacher should be there, and in elementary school, it's usually pretty simple where there's the one classroom teacher, and it's easier to coordinate these meetings. One of the advantages of COVID has actually been having virtual meetings where that's actually made it easier to get more people into the room at the same time. If there are co-teachers, you'd like to have both co-teachers there if they're job sharing. If it's high school and you've got the phys ed teacher and the music teacher and the shop teacher and the social studies teacher, et cetera, I work with a number of schools who make a very concerted effort to schedule high school IEPs as working lunch meetings where all of those important teachers can come to the IEP and at least hear what's going on, if not contribute. Or we arrange it before school or after school or whatever variation is going to work to have everybody there. Because we've just found through our own experience that if we have the meeting without those teachers, it's not as effective. It is more effective to get everybody on board with the plan because the IEP is the plan for the student. The education assistant should be there. And I warned you that I was going to harp on this one. I am a firm believer that the education assistant needs to be at the IEP. For two reasons. One is, as I've already stated, the education assistant is the person who usually spends the most time with the student, who knows them best, who knows the realities of what can and can't work well in the school. I've often been in the circumstance of circumstance of suggesting tactics and strategies. And it's the EA who can honestly tell me, oh yeah, I can totally do that. Or no, that can't work and here's why, right? It's impractical given these reasons. As a consultant who's part of my role is to share ideas and kind of load the buffet of options, I need that practical feedback so that I can deliver the most practical options that have that degree of fit, or the best fit. So the education assistant has insights that nobody else has. And I've gotten lots of great ideas throughout my career from education assistants, as we're all sitting around a meeting trying to come up with something, and it's the education assistant who has the keenest insight, and I'd like to celebrate that. The other thing is, because they are on the front line and they spend the most time, I just find it fundamentally disrespectful not to include that person in the IEP. So it's a bit of a soapbox issue. That's my personal stance on it. I'll come back to that because I feel strongly about it. The principal may or may not be there. I see it runs the gamut where we're having the IEP meeting and the principal pops in and just like lets the parent know that they're there. I'm here to support you. You guys know what you're doing. I won't get in the way, but if you need anything, let me know. To the principal coming in and participating through the whole thing and being actively involved, it really depends on the individual principal. Then, who else might be at that IEP meeting? It could be a guest of the parent. So parents are always free to bring in a family member, to bring in a relative, to bring in a friend, to bring in a parent advocate, to bring in a school trustee, to bring in their own clinicians. They might bring in their own BCBA or speech pathologist or occupational therapist as they see fit. So again, you can see how the table grows and grows. In some cases, there are social workers. I don't see that very often, but I've been in some meetings with social workers, school psychologists, counselors, other district specialists in learning, autism, et cetera. It really just depends on the district. So you can anticipate anywhere from a small meeting with teacher, parent, EA, to this larger cast. And then if you think about it, when it comes to planning these meetings, if there's 3 of us in the meeting, we're going to deal with time. We're going to manage time differently than if there's 12 of us in the meeting. And so if we have a 1-hour meeting that we think is sufficient for 3 people to meet, 1 hour is not going to be sufficient when 12 people are meeting. If everyone's going to be talking, you're not going to have a very productive meeting. You're not going to reach the best outcome because there's too many people. So I would also challenge schools to be thinking about just the time allotted to the meetings. That's something I'll mention again as well. So collaborative meeting features, the use of clear, concise, and jargon-free language. So think about what I've dumped on you already thus far. Parents in particular. You've got IEP, CBIOP, at the IOP, you've got the LTG and the STO and EIEIO, right? You've got all of these acronyms. And parents can go in and they're just overwhelmed with terms that are being used. And I think it's really important, in particular at the beginning of school journey, for the school team and everyone to recognize this is new to the parents. This might be your 10,000th IEP meeting, but it's their first one. And we need to be really mindful and sensitive to the language that we're using. Often because I've seen parents who feel intimidated and don't want to ask, don't want to look silly, don't want to look uninformed. And so after the meeting, then they'll go talk to somebody. What were all those terms? They should feel comfortable asking in the meeting. Better yet, don't even use the jargon so that they don't have to ask in the meeting. And then everyone will understand. If I'm dropping my jargon, the speech pathologist will understand me better. If she drops her jargon, I'll understand her better, right? It just works across everybody. So drop the jargon, whether that's professional jargon or the edu jargon and all the acronyms that go along with the IEP. Have sufficient time for participants to introduce themselves and explain their roles and responsibilities. I've been to some IEP meetings where I sit down and I look around the table and I'm smiling at everybody, and then we start and there were no introductions, and then halfway through, it's clear that, oh, that's who that person is, right? I didn't know. Just thinking about how to run a meeting effectively, have a clear agenda. The first item on the agenda can be, let's go around and either we introduce, somebody does the introductions or everyone introduces themselves so that everyone is clear on why each person is there and what their expertise is, right? It's just a good recommendation for how to run a meeting effectively. Clear identification and purpose of the meeting. So we have, let's say, 1 hour or 90 minutes or 2 hours. And by the time we're done, we want to achieve this objective. It's kind of just implied that, well, we're here for the IEP meeting. But you might get sidetracked into some sidebar discussion, and there goes 20 or 30 minutes, and you don't really get to the primary agenda items. So I always find it helpful to have a clear identification and purpose of the meeting. It can include appropriate review of the student's history. And this is a moving target across the school career. So in kindergarten, grade 1, when the student is new to the school, it absolutely makes sense for the parent in particular to share the student's history, right? So we understand more about this child and the family they come from, et cetera, et cetera. But that takes a fair bit of time in an IEP meeting. If we have primarily the same cast of characters by grade 3, 4, 5, and 6, but we still devote time to talking about background, that arguably becomes a less effective use of time because most people kind of already have the background. In terms of what is the best use of your time right now, reviewing, now becoming ancient history is less important than it was early on. So that changes from kindergarten through the end of elementary school. Now we move on to high school. And I recognize in some places there's also middle school. There's another transition. In my local jurisdictions, there's kindergarten to grade 7, and then there's high school from grade 8 to grade 12, and there's no middle school. But there are some Metro Vancouver districts with middle school. So again, when you enter middle school, you're going to want to talk about background, right? Review the history. And then when you get to high school, you're going to want to review the history. But then you can be more concise in reviewing that history through the grades leading up to the end of the school year, end of the school career, right? So just be careful. I think that the reason I mention this is I see some meetings where arguably the time management isn't done that well, where we discuss things that aren't the most important thing and are things we've discussed before and we're not getting to the new business. There should be visual supports for all attendees, and by that I mean there's a hard copy of the IEP in front of every participant. So I've been fortunate to be in some circumstances where I've had some special education teachers or schools actually ask for me to come in and coach someone, how do we do IEPs better? Which means they're seeking feedback and they're very receptive to that feedback. So I'll go in and I'll watch the first IEP, just do what you would usually do, and I'll be able to kind of assess present level, the baseline level, and I'll see things like the special education teacher has her laptop open in front of her, everyone files in, and the special education teacher, without any handouts for anybody else, just jumps straight into the document, and we've missed our introductions, so that would be some feedback. Let's take the time to do the introductions. And they're reading from the IEP, and you're going at a fairly quick pace because there's a lot of objectives we need to get through, typically in an hour or hour and a half, however long you have. And it is one thing to be sitting there across the table and hearing the objectives come very quickly and it's fleeting and it's gone, but you're supposed to process that and think about it, but you're still thinking about the last objective and then you're on to the next objective. It's arguably better for everybody, just like it would be for our students, to put the visual support in front of them so they've got the document there, they can look at it, they can take their time and read that definition, read that short-term objective, sit with it for a minute, and then be able to kind of process it and talk about it more effectively than if it's just this quick auditory-only input. Right? So have the visual supports. I've been to some Zoom or MS Team meetings format IEPs recently, and what's worked very well there is for the host and the author, the case manager, to just share their screen so that we're all looking at the same visual support. Just kind of makes sense. It's the little things that matter. And then finally, distribution of meeting minutes and any required follow-up after the meeting. So at the end of the meeting, there's typically actions. We're going to need these things from these people by this deadline. And that creates some contingencies for people to follow through with commitments that they make during the IEP meeting.